I'm Jesse Tolles. I'm the marketing director here at The Pass, and The Pass is a vertically integrated cannabis company, and we're based in Sheffield, Massachusetts. We're farm to label, and we're proud to cultivate, process, and sell our cannabis products through our retail dispensary in Sheffield, as well as via our wholesale channel to our partner dispensaries throughout the state of Massachusetts. So thank you guys. Thank you all the panelists. Thank you all the attendees for joining us. This is actually our inaugural speaker series, so we're pretty excited. We put a lot of effort. Hey, Melissa. A lot of effort into setting this up. So we're kicking off a monthly speaker series to provide educational info as well as guidance to our community on a whole range of topics, all around and for cannabis. For April, this one, we're discussing getting your garden ready to plant cannabis and everything else. So we've assembled this dream team of incredible experts. Yes, you guys are the dream team. They all come from different organizations, and we'll be discussing everything from compost to seed starting to plant growing tips, and yes, of course, cannabis growing advice. So you can definitely Google everything these days. We all know that's the truth. So we, as a group here, we're going to dig a little deeper and get at the tricks of the trades that our experts here have mastered over the years. The format is we'll be starting with intros for these speakers. We'll follow with a longer session with directed questions, more of a roundtable discussion with our panelists. And then at the end, we'll have some time to open up the event to share questions from the audience for the panelists to respond to answer. So to kick this off, this group of talented individuals is comprised of Danko. Danny Vinkovetsky is formerly known as Danny Danko of High Times. He's the author of Cannabis, A Beginner's Guide to Growing Marijuana, the editor of Northeast Leaf, and the host of Grow Bud Yourself podcast. We also have Doug Muller. He is the co-founder and managing director at Hudson Valley Seed Company. We have Melissa Beeson Higgins, who is the founder and primary operator at Berkshire Compost. And last but not least is my colleague, Pete Steimer, our very own director of cultivation at The Pass. So now, if you could each, as panelists, share a quick bit about yourselves. We're going to start with, in that order, Dan, if you could kick this one off with intros.
Yeah, basically you mentioned that I worked at High Times. I was there for 18 years and along the way wrote a couple of books, Strain Guide in 2011 and the Beginner's Guide to Growing Marijuana in 2018. And now the editor at Northeast Leaf magazine for the last 2 years and the host of the Grow Bud Yourself podcast. And I've been traveling all around the world for the last couple of decades, visiting a lot of different gardens, done some growing of my own as well, obviously during that time, but certainly have visited many hundreds of different styles of cannabis gardens all around the world and judged more of the competitions, I think, than probably anyone on earth. So it's a passion for me for sure. I'm a big advocate of cannabis as a healing flower, and just been working as much as I can as an activist and a journalist to spread the word.
Thanks for your contributions in the industry. Really appreciate that. And now, Doug, if you could give your intro.
Yeah, so my name is Doug Muller. In 2008, I started the Hudson Valley Seed Library with my partner, Kay Green. And we are a farm-based seed company working with open pollinated vegetables, flowers, and herbs. Since 2008, we've grown quite a bit. We now have a staff of 30. We offer about 400 plus seed varieties in our catalog. We're committed to organic. Our farm is certified organic. And we've gotten more into things like dahlia tubers and other vegetative materials, trees. This year we partnered with a local farm to do apple and pear trees. So we're committed to the region and committed to organics, and I'm excited to be here and share what I know.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think we in general are also excited for you to be here. Melissa, you up next?
Okay, here I am. You can't see me, but you can hear me. I'm having some technical difficulties, but so I started Berkshire Compost in 2019 because I just wanted to help my neighbors keep food waste out of the landfill. My concern is just how much is going there. And as I learned more, realized how important compost and food scraps can be to soil regeneration. So that's really where my angle has come from, is to really get all of the nutrients from those food scraps that otherwise would go into the landfills back into local farms.
Thank you as well for what you do. Very much appreciated in the community. And Pete, if you could wrap us up.
Sure, of course. So I'm Pete Steimer. I'm the director of cultivation at The Pass, like Jesse touched on. Personally, I came from agricultural R&D prior to joining the cannabis industry. So I might not have the decades of experience like Danny brought to the table in the cannabis world. But after leaving commercial ag, I went up to Maine, worked in the medical cannabis industry for several years prior to coming south down to Massachusetts, where the Pass is located. One thing that I think is really cool about the Pass is we actually cultivate indoor cannabis, greenhouse grown cannabis, as well as outdoor cannabis. So we're implementing multiple growing techniques. And, you know, I'm excited to continue to flood the state with high quality cannabis.
As am I. Thanks, Pete.
Sure.
So now let's pivot into the questions for the panelists. So we have a set of questions. We're going to have more of a roundtable conversation where the panelists will answer, have those combos hopefully be wonderfully organic. So the first one is for Doug, Danny, and Pete. Where is the best place to start a garden? And also how much sun or light and what kind of light are necessary for cannabis and other plants?
Sure. Well, for when we're talking about other plants, which is my specialty, I'll preface the whole conversation with I don't know that much about growing cannabis, so my comments are more on the vegetable, flower, herb side of things. For a vegetable garden, as much sun as possible is the first key consideration. Pretty much every homegrown crop benefits from as much sun as possible, and that's typically the limiting factor for folks growing at home. They have a shady backyard, they have a nearby neighbor blocking the sun, that sort of thing. But even if you don't have that much sun, there are crops you can grow, various herbs and leafy greens that do well in lower light conditions. You need well-draining soil. If you don't have well-draining soil, you need either raised beds or containers. And the other key thing, for folks in our region in particular, is protection from deer and other critters. Pretty much all edible crops that humans grow are also edible for the natural herbivores in our region. So deer fencing and lower critter fencing are both really useful tools to succeed in a vegetable garden.
So I'll just echo a little bit what Doug had just said. And, you know, cannabis is very much a light loving plant. It's going to eat up as much sunlight as you can possibly throw at it. So again, trying to find somewhere that's kind of getting as much direct sun throughout the day as possible is critical for cannabis. You know, anything south facing would be great. Is kind of the big one. You know, if you're planting rows, a north to south planting would be ideal. And in terms of the actual kind of light, you know, just to touch on that a little bit, in the springtime, you're going to see a lot of vegetative growth. Cannabis is a photosensitive plant, which means it's not going to flower until your day lengths are reduced. And that's why typically your fall harvest comes, because you're reducing your day length. At that time in the fall, you're actually switching the spectrum as well to more of a red light, which does promote flowering, which is very similar to what you'll see like a lot of these indoor grow growers mimic, where, you know, in their veg room, they're going to have a much, you know, more blue light coming through. And then once you get into the flower rooms, typically you're going to get more into that red range. And that's exactly what you see outside as well. So the main takeaway is as much sun as you possibly can give them. They will absolutely use it.
Yeah, I would echo that as well. Full sun is important. Well draining soil is important. But keep in mind with that, you'll need to water very frequently because as the plant is soaking up all that sun, it's also using up a lot of the water, and which is also evaporating. So the best place is in full sun. If you can't have full sun, if you've got the shady backyard, a greenhouse with supplemental lighting is great as well. If you're going indoors, I tell people a grow tent is probably the best option because they're fairly cheap. They can be put up and taken down by one person usually, and they come equipped with intake and outtake fans and things like that. There's a lot of kits out there. And as far as light, I mean, there's been a lot of advancements made with light emitting diode LED technology. And then, of course, there's high intensity discharge lighting, metal halide and high pressure sodium, and fluorescent lighting as well that people use for rooting clones and for vegetative growth. So the best place to start a garden is in full sun, and the best time is right now.
Thank you all. So we just actually had a question. Does anybody want to speak a little bit more about indoor cannabis cultivation tied to sunlight and placement? I know, Danny, you just reflected on infrastructure, right?
Right. Indoors, if you're in a tent or a closet or a room, you're going to want a decent amount of light for sure. And you're going to want to have a timer so that you can provide the right amount of light at the different times. So there's vegetative growth and then flowering growth. So you're going to want at least, I would say, 18 hours of light per day during the vegetative stage. And then when you want the plant to begin the flowering stage, you want to reduce that to 12 hours on and 12 hours off. And make sure not to interrupt the dark 12 hours with any kind of light. So that's really indoors, the important thing, and just controlling the environment inside that tent or that space as far as temperature and humidity is very important as well.
Yeah, I think another thing I'd like to add about the indoor growing is, you know, one thing I think people also have to keep in mind is that, you know, if you're starting seeds or, you know, getting rooted clones, the light intensity required is much less than once you get into like the peak of flowering. So I always tell people to, you know, when you're starting your seedlings or your clones, to start with lower light intensity and just gradually ramp it up throughout the growing cycle. So by the time you're, you know, early on in flowering, you should have your light on full boost. You know, one thing that Danny touched on was, you know, all the LEDs out there nowadays. A lot of them, you know, you're getting that like 3000 to 3500 Kelvin spectrum, where historically, like I said, like a veg fluorescent tube might be like 6500 K, which is, like I said, very, very blue, where, you know, an HPS bulb, for example, might be closer to your 2000 to 2500 K. So again, we're seeing the LEDs kind of find a middle ground between historic blue and reds, which I think are kind of getting that more like full spectrum light, which I think has, yes, very much come a long way. And I think is going to be the future for light fixtures.
I like that phrase, the future for light fixtures. So you just touched on seeds and propagating. You know, there are different ways to, and different points in the life cycle of plants to start and transition plants. So our next question is, when is the best time to start seeds or propagate plants? When is the best time to put plants in the ground indoors or outdoors? And then there's this Mother's Day rule. So is the Mother's Day rule for real?
All right, I'll start with that. I guess the best time to start seeds is now or sooner, basically. I mean, depending on the size of the plants you want to grow. Some of those big plants that people see in Northern California, some of those are started in December and grown indoors until they're 3 or 4 feet tall. and then put outside after the first frost, the last frost, I should say, after there's no threat of any kind of frost. So depending on where you are, that changes as you go north. But as far as the spring is when traditionally cannabis seeds will warm up in the soil and begin to grow into their seedling and vegetative stage. So it's a great time to put plants, to start plants that you're going to put outdoors, basically in May or so. And indoors, it's really up to the grower. I mean, you're in control of when the plants are propagated, when they begin flowering, and when they finish. So indoors, there's really no set rule, although it's tougher to grow indoors in the summer in some places than other times just because of heat issues. And as far as the Mother's Day rule, I mean, I think for most of New England, that's a decent time to plant. But I will also defer as well to Douglas as far as plants besides cannabis.
Sure. Yeah. The Mother's Day is a good rule of thumb for all the frost sensitive plants we grow. So in addition to cannabis, that would be tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, melons, squash, like all sorts of things. But the vegetable garden is very flexible, and there's lots of crops you can grow in the vegetable garden that you can start earlier than the last frost date. So things like right now, which I mean, today we're having an unseasonably warm day, but typically this time of year, there's still frost in the evenings occasionally. But there are lots of things you can plant outside: peas, radishes, spinach, arugula, lettuce, carrots, like the very long list of candidates for the vegetable garden this time of year, which is great because it helps to space out the work. If the plants will be happier and the gardener will be happier if you get those sort of hardier crops in now, and then hold off and don't do like this giant planting in May. Like space it out and start with the hardy stuff now and build up to the frost tender stuff in mid to late May.
Yeah, I would also add that if you start plants indoors and then your plan is to place them outside, to acclimate them over the course of a few days or a week or more to full sun before just placing them outside in full sun, because they will likely burn or die if they're just put into full sun immediately from an indoor environment. So, an hour or two a day, and then bump it up and acclimate them to full sun before just placing them out there for a full day.
Yeah, that's 100% true for vegetables as well. They need a hardening off period, and also best to do your transplanting on an overcast day. Anything that's like gray, humid, that's like the right day to do your transplanting. The plants will be much happier.
And I just want to add, like Danny was saying here a second ago, sure, like we can veg from December until May. Historically, I think in the Northeast, at least, we don't have, a Northern California climate where we can grow these humongous shrubs that we see out West. So, I like to try to get at least like a 3-week-old plant prior to transplanting. I mean, I'm definitely a person that's an advocate for trying to get a decent sturdy plant prior to going outside. Me personally, I push it more closer to Memorial Day as opposed to Mother's Day. I think the plants absolutely can handle it from Mother's Day onward, but I like to give it a few more weeks just to play it safe and ensure that temps are where they need to be, and all the plants will take fine.
Perfect. Thank you. So I'm sure the audience is wondering, Melissa, we are not disrespecting Melissa, just so you all know. We have a set of questions, and they are all in a roundtable format for a specific set of individuals. So I promise you, we will hear from Melissa soon. So our next question: what are your 3 favorite plant species or cultivars to grow in the Northeast?
I'll start this one off. So just right out of the gate, I don't know if I can say that I have a favorite cultivar necessarily to grow in the Northeast. What I would like to emphasize is that the Northeast, we're prone to getting sudden frosts and late rains, storms, things like that. So for me, I think the more important thing is the finishing time of your cultivar that you're selecting. So there's some genetics out there that claim a 45-day flowering time, which is very quick. So I think anything that's 56 days or under, it would be a prime candidate to grow in the Northeast, just so you can get it down before you get any potential inclement weather later in the season. So again, I don't know if I have a favorite, hey, this is the cultivar for you to grow in the Northeast, but I think just really paying attention to that flowering time is going to be critical when you're selecting your cultivars.
Yeah, I would also say, you want something that's not super dense because of the issues with mold, powdery mildew, and things in the fall. Another benefit is faster flowering, as mentioned, but also auto flower plants are done much sooner, sometimes in July or August, to avoid that sort of thing. But I would just say it's a sativa dominant hybrid that doesn't have a very long flowering time. So Jack Herer, Strawberry Coffin, Blue Dream, as much as people don't like it, it's a very hardy cultivar that can really withstand a lot of the tougher New England weather that people have to deal with.
I would say that some of that guidance kind of applies to vegetables to look for. In the Northeast, we can grow pretty much any vegetable you can think of, but you have to select the right varieties to make sure that they mature before our frost dates in the fall. Our catalog is full of those varieties. Everything we offer is often grown. The seed is typically produced here, and if not, we've trialed it enough to know that it's a really good performing vegetable, flower, or herb for our region. In terms of like my favorite plant species to grow in this region, peppers are one of my favorite things. They love our heat and our humidity in the summer. They love as much water as you can give them. Tomatoes don't. Our climate's veering wetter, so peppers are typically a really successful, abundant crop to grow, and they do well into the fall, like until frost. Love growing dahlias. If anyone has not ever seen a dahlia or knows what dahlias are, they're like spectacular flowers. They're grown from tubers, very easy to grow. And again, they love water, so they tend to do pretty well in our region. And I also love growing Napis kales. So like the Russian type kales, these are kale species is a kale species that's hardier than like a Vates kale. And so they typically overwinter in our region. So without protection. So you can harvest them more or less all year long, all season long. They'll overwinter, and this time of, the next month or so, they'll start sending up shoots, and you can harvest them as like kale rapinis. And those are really nice. So that's like something that seems well suited to the Northeast. All three of those crops are well suited to the Northeast climate and the Northeast garden in my mind.
Anything else to add, team? Nope. Great. So the next one does include Melissa. Hey, Melissa. Are there any secret ingredients you all add to your soil that you are willing to share with us?
Oh, you want me? Oh, well, I think everybody else who's actually growing something might have that secret ingredient. My secret ingredient, obviously, is the food scraps that I pick up from my customers and that we're bringing in to be composted. And we add other feedstocks to bulk it up. So there's wood chips and leaves and hay and horse manure, all of that to get a high temperature. And so high temperature and good ingredients are, that's the secret of making good compost. Now, the secret to growing good seeds, I don't know as much on that.
From a sort of vegetable perspective, I feel like in the Northeast, compost absolutely is key. So Melissa, I agree 100% with you there that you're doing a valuable job producing the compost. In an organic garden, compost is essential. Putting down like a 1-inch layer across your entire garden is never a bad idea. In addition to that, in the Northeast, typically a really useful additive in the soils if you're growing in ground is lime, pulverized garden lime. In the Northeast, our soils are acidic, almost across. I mean, there's a few non-acidic soils around, but very few. All vegetable crops, essentially besides potatoes, need a more balanced pH soil. So adding pulverized lime to your garden at a sort of calculated rate, which varies depending on the pH of your soil, helps you'll see like tremendous gains in your garden if you haven't been doing that. It makes for stronger plants, less brittle plants, just adds like structure to plant cells. So lime is sort of something I always advise in the Northeast, and also we use we sell and we use like a sort of generic plant-based vegan mix type fertilizer, which has bean meals, like legume meals, and sources of phosphorus and potassium as well. So it's a really general purpose product that we sell, and typically for the home scale, when you're not trying to like get crazy optimal yields out of your plants, but are trying to grow things that have like really good flavor. And that's, you don't have to overthink it too much, but adding compost and lime and a general purpose organic fertilizers, generally my rule of thumb for home growers.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I think this is a trend that I'm really enjoying, is this living soil thing that people are doing, where they're just adding organic material on top, compost, and everything else. And it makes you not have to use as much added nutrients as well. One thing I love is a product called green sand. It's actually mineral deposits from the ocean floor, and it's a nice addition to an organic garden. And also oxygenated compost tea as well, where you can take compost and steep it overnight, 24 hours or so, and oxygenate that as well. That seems to be a really great mild nutrient that you can foliar feed with, or use as a soil drench. And for cannabis, for flowering cannabis, I think bat guano is a great, it's basically bat poop, but it's a great flowering nutrient because of the bats diet, whether it be bugs, the shells of the bugs that the bats eat, or fruit bats as well. There's a lot of potassium and phosphorus and things. So those would be, yeah, green sand, compost tea, and bat guano.
So I'll just echo what my fellow panelists have said about the compost, that obviously everyone is in agreement on, that will be an essential addition. I think anything that's going to increase the organic matter of the soil that you're using is going to be very beneficial. Anything that's going to kind of get your nutrient holding capacity up, increase your CEC, which is how much nutrients that soil can actually bind up to become plant available, which any compost would be great for that. One thing I did want to also touch on, which I know we discussed earlier in this, was the aeration of the soil. Everyone's familiar with perlite, which is those little white chunks that come in a bag of soil that you buy from the store, which are great. It really kind of gives that root zone a lot more opportunity to expand through your pots. But if you didn't want to go with the perlite, a lot of the organic growers these days are using rice hulls instead. And there's a lot of really interesting studies out there that are showing rice hulls are equally, if not more effective than perlite, which is pretty cool to see.
Yeah, one other thing that I would add is also mycelial, the benefits of mycelium in conjunction with plant roots. It's the earliest relationship on earth, I think, is between fungus and plants at that level. And I think it's very beneficial to have mycelial strands also in your soil.
I feel like mycelium could be its own speaker series event. So you just planted the seed here. Appreciate that one. So the next question is, Melissa, this is specifically for you. What are the benefits of compost? What is the best type? There was a mention of aerobic. We also have cold composting, vermicomposting, and then there are electric machines that are, on the home scale and definitely on the industrial scale, facilitating quicker and different kinds of compost. So maybe you can speak to all that.
Well, I will say the best composting is any composting that you're willing to do. We have to meet people where they're most comfortable. My business is I'm a micro hauler, so I make it easy for people. They just put their food waste in a bucket and they don't have to worry about it. I come and take it away and we bring it to the farm. Over here at Stanton Home. And Stanton Home, they're putting them in windrows and they're doing that manually, with tractors, that sort of thing. Larger facilities will see more of that machinery. And there's also anaerobic digesters, and that will take your food waste and actually turn it into energy. But for just the overall, we all know that I think at this point that compost and composting rather than putting food scraps into our landfill is going to help us combat climate change. Using finished compost prevents soil erosion, helps conserve water, it promotes healthier plant growth. It's going to reduce your need for chemical fertilizers. And again, back to enriching and retaining moisture. So those are definitely the benefits of it. As far as the best kind, because I had seen there was some Lumi I had never heard of before. So I looked at that. And again, that's trying to help people who do want to keep their food scraps out of the landfill and perhaps they live in the city or that sort of thing. And it's better than obviously putting it in the landfill. But as far as what the natural process of composting, time is really the best. Just the natural process of having your food scraps combined, the greens and the browns, but there's actually kind of like 4 categories. You want things that are porous, some things that are neutral, like horse manure and hay. You just want to have a variety. Diversity is the best. And the other, when we're talking about vermicomposting, everything has its own individual benefits, but composting the way it is in the windrows, this natural time process, it reaches a high temperature when it's managed properly. Not so much when people have their compost in their backyard and they, you just have a pit or, just a pile that you just naturally let time take care of. And that will eventually become natural product that you can use in your gardens. However, the windrow system provides heat. And with that heat, we can get rid of some weed seeds. We can get rid of salmonella, those bacteria that you can get rid of, because you really don't want to put your weeds in that compost and then have it all deteriorate, but then put it on your garden and now you're getting lots of things that you don't want without the benefits of the compost. So overall, all compost is good. It's better than nothing. But given what the specific needs are, you'll want to look into what's appropriate for your garden usage.
Perfect. Maybe we can jump into the next one, which ties into this and an audience question. So someone's confused about which veggies to compost. And there's can we add non-organic veggies? And then it goes on to ask about genetically modified. So that's a whole can of worms, but the genetically modified products thrown into compost. So with that said, Melissa and Doug, how do you get started with compost? What do you really need? And then, depending on your method, how long until you actually have black gold to use?
Sure, I'll jump in on home garden side. Regarding those questions, most home gardeners have a very loose compost system, and I'm one of them. I'm very busy with work, and so my composting system is basically 4 old pallets strung together with zip ties, and I throw everything in there without any thought. I'm not even good at covering it, and yet over time at the bottom of the pile you'd see wow, that looks really good. As Melissa said, time really does take care of things. Everything decomposes naturally, so most home gardeners do something similar to that because it's rare for a home gardener to have the time and equipment and ability to sort of monitor their compost enough to keep the temperature hot, because it requires turning it over and getting the balance of carbon and nitrogen just right of what you're throwing in there. So I'm an advocate for just like in your backyard, just dump it all in a pile. If you have a backyard, put it all in a pile and let time do its thing. Regards to the like GMO crops going in there or like pesticide residue going in there that might be on non-organic crops. The compost kind of is magic, and really, everything gets transformed in there. And so I wouldn't worry too much about throwing in non-organic vegetables into your compost bin. The whatever residue might exist of pesticides, as long as your bin is open to the elements, especially like the rains wash through it, all sorts of stuff gets sort of taken away through the compost. You're left with the organic matter. And I think it's, it's sort of almost, if you have questions, if you have feelings or questions about that GMO product or that non-organic product, it's almost like the best, the highest transformation you can achieve with that product is throwing it in your compost pile and integrating it into your organic system. So, I wouldn't worry too much about that.
Melissa, would you like to chime in on
Sure. I agree. Like if you have something in your backyard, you are just going to want to use, vegetable matter. You're not going to want to do all of your food scraps. You stay away from meat and dairy, basically because, again, without high temperatures, you're not going to be able to monitor bacterial growth in it. And also you'll be bringing a lot of pests. So it'll attract, wildlife and mice and, all things that you don't really want in your garden. So I would just stick with vegetative material in your backyard composting. But if you are interested in getting rid of all of it, there's a lot of different methods. There's something called bokashi, which is essentially what you're doing is fermenting all of your food products. And then you're burying it under the ground, again, giving it time to turn in to, like you said, black gold. Time does take, it takes a long time, even with the windrow. We're talking probably about 6 months until it's ready to actually use in a garden, because there's an active phase where it's going to be a high temp, where if you were to put your hand inside of the compost heap, you would still see recognizable food matter. But after 6 months, in the windrow, when you pull your hand out, you just see just dirt, the soil. You wouldn't see any recognizable food matter. So it all depends on where the manner in which you're composting. I know that if you're doing with worms, they don't like onions and they don't like citrus. So you have to, again, look at what products you're going to compost. But just for keeping it in the backyard, yeah, just stick with your vegetative material.
And I would say that that sort of not heavily managed backyard compost pile generally takes more in the 12 to 18 month range to get the full decomposition.
Right. Thank you both. Also, Melissa, I did not know about worms' dietary preferences. That was great. Good to know. The next question is about pest control, and this one's for the whole group. We also had a question in the chat about mold growing on the top of buds. So outdoor cannabis grow, top buds having mold. So there's a specific question from the audience. I'm wondering if you can talk to molds and all sorts of pests as well. So what's the single best or multiple best things that you can do?
So I would say the single best thing that I would recommend for pest control is absolutely scouting. Getting out there and walking the beds, walking the benches, whatever you're growing in. I always encourage our growers to start their day with scouting the environment that they're growing in. Finding the pest pressure before it's actually an issue is going to be your best defense. So that is, I think, if we're asking for the single most important thing, my mind instantly goes to scouting your garden and being in there studying the plants every single day.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. I mean, prevention is so much easier and more important than dealing with an actual infestation. And I think things like having yellow sticky traps there as kind of an indicator and because plants are attracted to bugs are attracted to that yellow color, I would say also removing any yellow leaves or damaged leaves, and not having invitations for pests like puddles on the floor, and dead plant material and things like that. That's what they're looking for. So discouraging them first is the best. And integrated pest management is a multitude of things, including beneficial insects and nematodes and things that you can also release. I would also stress that sticking to organic means insecticidal soaps and things that aren't for ornamental flowers and things like that. A lot of times people will go nuclear, and I think that's to be certainly avoided for vegetables or cannabis, anything that you're going to consume.
One of the main things that we do on the farm to prevent pests is the use of floating row cover. For vegetables, there's some very predictable pests that are seasonal. So for things like eggplants or spring brassicas, more or less the only way to get an organic crop of either of those vegetables in the Northeast is to use row cover or some other exclusionary fabric to keep flea beetles off of them. And in May, then there's pepo squashes like zucchinis and summer squashes and pumpkins. Those can be very bothered by pests specific to squash plants. So the row cover is sort of an all-purpose tool. It's a air and water permeable fabric that you more or less can just throw on top of some plants. Some you have to put some wire hoops to cover the plants to keep the fabric off the plants. But they also keep moisture in. So if you're in a situation where you don't have good access to irrigation, if you throw the row cover on top of your plants, it keeps them from transpiring so much. So it's sort of a all-purpose like wonder tool in the organic cultivation kind of toolbox, and we use it a lot. We sell it too, but I advise folks who have pest problems, especially in the spring, to give it a shot, because oftentimes it will sort of on its own just solve those problems by keeping the pests off the plants.
Last words? Great. What would you all say is the most important thing or things you can do to maximize yield?
I would say, the important thing is the amount of roots and the size of the root mass is directly related to the size of the plant. So if you're growing in containers, growing in larger containers, whatever it is, allowing the roots to expand will certainly maximize yield. And also during the vegetative stage, any kind of pruning, pinching, training the plants will also help maximize yield, but you don't want to do any of that after the plant has started flowering.
Yeah, I'll reinforce what Danny was saying there about the root zone. I mean, I think dialing in your irrigation cycles to really make sure that those roots are stretching for the moisture in the bottom of the pots, if you are growing in containers, and really filling out the bottom of the pot is essential. Another thing that I think is kind of underestimated a lot of times is that the nutrient concentrations in the feeds can directly affect the yields. If it's not just always, hey, you're going to throw a bunch more fertilizer on there and you're going to get a much higher yield, because you can actually decrease your yield significantly by overfeeding your plants. So I think monitoring that root zone, taking runoff data and actually seeing like where your salt content is in your root zone is also an essential piece. In the veg state, like Danny was saying, the training of the plants, the pruning of the plants is also critical. That being said, I think cultivars are all different. We've got some cultivars that you only need to veg for 2 weeks and you get a humongous productive plant. And then we've got other cultivars that need that 6-week veg time. And the bud size that you get between, say, a 4-week strain that really needed that 6-week veg time can be very significant. So I think really learning the cultivar that you're growing and trying to really dial it in before flipping it into the 12-12 is critical.
For a veg garden, vegetables are pretty forgiving, and it's rare that on the home garden scale anyone gets too hung up on yield questions, because it's like it doesn't take too much square footage to produce like pretty decent volumes of vegetables for the home garden. So I think on the home garden side, it's more like the priorities tend to be more around how can you get some flavors that you can't find at the grocery store produce, or how can you get some like a succession of flowers so that you always have some flowers to put in a vase on your dining room table, something like that. So generally, like treating the soil well, irrigating regularly, those things in a veg garden typically will give enough yield for your efforts, and you'll feel good about it. Most of the highest yielding varieties of vegetables are sort of more commercial grade, and oftentimes the flavor and eating qualities are not quite as good as what people enjoy most from their gardens. So I would say that unless you've got a homestead and you're trying to feed a giant family, that like when you're considering what to grow in your vegetable garden, definitely let taste and color and textures and eating quality guide you more than questions about yield, and you'll probably find that the yield will take care of itself.
Cool. I think that's a whole conversation about our focus in general on yield versus in cannabis, TAC or terpene content, as well as with vegetables. You were just talking about the structure of the fruit or whatever you're harvesting, and the flavor composition. So, maybe that's another, workshop 201. So for cannabis and for the veg garden, what would you all say are the good companion plants, beneficial plants?
I could speak on that. I think marigolds are a great companion plant. They keep away white flies. Peppermint is a pretty decent one for aphid populations. Dill is a good one to discourage spider mites. And I've seen sometimes where gardeners, rather than being really companion plants, they'll use plants like a canary in the coal mine kind of situation, where they'll have bean stalks or bean plants near their cannabis plants, and hopefully the whatever insects are there will attack the bean plant first. So spider mites in particular love beans. So that's another one too, where it's not so much a companion as it's like a canary in the coal mine, like a early indicator that you might have pests, and a way to encourage them to go onto the beans rather than to your cannabis.
Yeah, I think a lot of the companion plants that become beneficial are similar to a lot of the essential oils and products out there that are a lot less harmful, and that a lot of cannabis growers are using. So like when you look at a lot of these products that are marketed for cannabis growers, a lot of them will have rosemary extract, thyme oil, things like that. So I think plants in with those terpenes that do kind of repel pests are going to be critical. I know garlic is another one that's huge right now. So the garlic, the thyme, rosemary, things like that, I think are all great companion plants. And then, Danny touched on the marigolds. He also mentioned like the biological controls, which are basically our beneficial bugs. And a lot of them will actually eat the pollen as well. So you can actually sustain your biological populations by providing them a food source like flowering plants that aren't cannabis.
Yeah, I think that growing, especially like easily grown annual flowers like marigolds, but also just other things like zinnias, dahlias, cosmos, things that all those flowers attract pollinators, which just brings more of the ecological cycle into your environment, and does increase like the population of predatory insects that are able to help take care of some of the insect pressure. So I think that adding flowers to any garden is always a smart idea. And it's also, of course, really pretty and nice to walk out there. One other companion plant that's just sort of general purpose for anything, or I guess companion plant category, would be leguminous cover crops. So things like clover or field peas, these are crops that fix nitrogen into the soil. So they sort of provide the food that most other plants require to find in the soil, this category of plants creates that food from air and puts it into the soil. So one easy strategy is to use white clover as a path in any kind of garden. You can walk on it, and while you're walking on it, it's happily just feeding your soil nitrogen. So and there's other plants similar to that, and they're one of my always sort of top recommendations for folks to include somewhere in their gardening plans.
Awesome. So the next one, this one's Danny and Pete, you guys, indoor versus outdoor cannabis. You know, maybe you can touch on some pros, cons, disadvantages, and advantages of one versus the other.
Yeah, I mean, the obvious advantage to outdoors is free sunshine. The disadvantage is everything else, the elements, the dust, the wind, the rain, the pests. So to me, really, I mean, Pete can speak more on this because he's growing all of these different ways. To me, the greenhouse is the perfect in between, because you do take advantage of the free sunshine, but you can also have some control over the environment, and you can use supplemental lighting when you don't have enough sunshine, and you can use light deprivation to flower when you have too much sunshine. So you can actually flower plants in the middle of the summer if that's what you're interested in, and you can grow throughout the year. I've seen greenhouses, heated greenhouses in Maine, growing with snow outside and with tropical plants in the greenhouses. So I think that's really the best of both worlds. And hopefully, you know, cannabis does not love being grown indoors. It's not, you know, it wants to be outside and in living soil and full sun. So I'm hoping that, you know, a lot of these facilities will switch over to more greenhouse and outdoor type of situations. But I do think the greenhouse is kind of the best of both worlds.
You know, I agree. I think the indoor right out of the gate, I think everyone always goes at the electricity usage that comes with an indoor facility. You know, that's always going to be, I think, the one thing that strikes out as the biggest difference. You know, that these indoor facilities with the LED technology coming on, like we talked about, you are getting energy savings, absolutely, but you still have the dehumidification, the heating, the cooling, CO2 injection, all of that, which also has its advantages, because then you have complete control over that environment. You know, like I mentioned earlier, you can actually control increasing your light intensity to kind of gradually build the plant and kind of get it acclimated to that higher light intensity. Same thing with the CO2 levels. You know, you can gradually boost the CO2 levels to be able to allow those plants to process the higher light intensity as well by adding that supplemental CO2. So I think having that complete control over the indoor environment is fantastic. But obviously being able to harness the power of the sun is great. And honestly, I think with outdoor cannabis, you get a lot of different terpene expressions, even with the same cultivars. You know, you could grow the same cultivar indoor and outdoor, and you might get different flavors out of it because of that. So that, I think, is a big factor in it as well. But no, I think, you know, the greenhouses are kind of, they're the best of both worlds. You know, there's sensors in the greenhouse where it automatically knows the light intensity, and it knows if it's a cloudy day, and it's going to turn on your supplemental lights without you having to manually go in there and turn it on. So so it almost kind of modifies itself to enable, you know, a healthy crop out there. So no, I agree. I think the greenhouse is a good split difference. Obviously outdoor is, I think, the most natural, and it's kind of where cannabis first started, obviously. So so people love that. One thing I do want to touch on is that, you know, with the prohibition of cannabis, I mean, a lot of these cultivars have been bred for indoor growing environments. And I think that's one thing that a lot of people do not consider when they go into the outdoor growing field, is that, you know, you can't take some strain that they've grown solely indoors and expect it to be some powerhouse performer outdoors. Sometimes it does, absolutely. But I think you should absolutely keep that in mind, that these plants haven't been bred to be grown in Massachusetts. So that's where your cultivar selection and finding kind of what works best for your location is critical.
Perfect. Thank you. So the last two questions, there are two more for the group. What is the best advice you can give someone?
I'll kick this one off. So for me, I think a lot of people will overthink cannabis and they'll be very reactive with what they see in their garden. You know, they'll see one yellow leaf and next thing you know, they're dumping a whole bunch more food on it, and then you're overfeeding your plants. So I think there's a balance there where there's a lot of like scientific data that you should be grabbing during your grow. But I think for a new cultivator is start basic and just kind of get your feet about you, learn the process, learn the plant, learn how it grows. Generally, you know, what signs of overfeeding are, what signs of overwatering are, and things like that, and kind of get a good educational base, if you will, prior to just saying, hey, I'm gonna grow an entire room of cannabis. You know, start with 4 plants in a 4x4 and see how it goes, and kind of tiptoe into it. That's what I would recommend a newbie grower coming online.
Yeah, I would echo that as well. Just be patient, but vigilant, and take notes too, you know, so that you, if you end up having to deal with the same problem, you know what you did last time, and you know when you harvested, when you planted, all those things that you think you might remember, you might also forget. And I think taking notes is really important, and something that people don't do as much as maybe they should. And patience is important, but vigilance as well. So check the undersides of the leaves, check the surface of your growing medium every day, and don't overreact to any problems, but deal with them appropriately.
On the vegetable side, I would say that you're dealing with such a wide cast of characters in the vegetable garden, and so many divergent sort of needs and personalities and attributes, that I think it's the most fun and sort of joyful approach is to kind of go a little bit, be very free with what you start doing. Like be ambitious and don't worry about it. Be optimistic and sort of see what happens. Things will fail for sure. Like your first year growing, you will not get the results you want in some way, but then other things will succeed, like always. And that's just sort of plants' natural like generosity kind of coming through. And so you get to kind of enjoy that and run with that energy, take what you observed the first year, apply it the next year, and keep doing that. One of the interesting things about growing is that, you know, for at least for annual vegetables, you know, if you've been growing for 10 years, that means you've only started tomato seeds probably 10 times. And that's not very many times over the course of 10 years. It takes like, you know, 10 minutes to sow the seeds. So like you don't, the accumulation of knowledge in growing is a slow process. So give yourself patience, give yourself sort of permission to fail, and identify what you're doing, what's doing well, and identify what you're enjoying, and kind of let have your sort of efforts move in that direction kind of naturally.
Okay, so for me, the best advice is compost. At any level, any way that you can get involved in it, whether it's in your backyard, or using a compost service, or using a tumbler, or there's just a myriad of ways that you can compost. And truthfully, composting people are very happy people. I think it's a sense that there's joy, that you're actually part of a solution. You're connected to the whole cycle of your food. You know, that farm to table, this is table back to farm. And I think there's even in the backyard when you're doing it, there's a giddiness that you can see that you had an effect. Like that is something that you helped move along, that it's not just somebody else's problem that you put at the side of the road, and you never know what happens, and you hear all the bad news about the landfills and things like that. And when you're working in the garden, or even when you get your fruits and vegetables, especially if you buy local, knowing that when you compost, you're actually part of that cycle. I think it's, you know, we're very happy people. So I suggest you do.
Thank you. Yeah, I think there's something to be said about the regenerative process, creating something from your scraps or your waste and closing that loop. So I love that piece of it, Melissa. So last question is, you know, what's What's the biggest mistake most first timers make? And I bet you all have some funny examples to share.
I mean, I think with cannabis, the biggest mistake is overfeeding and overwatering, typically, and also misdiagnosing problems. So that if you are, if your pH, for instance, is off, and you're feeding the plant and you misdiagnose the pH imbalance as a nutrient deficiency, and then you give it more food, you're compounding the problem and not fixing the issue with acidity or alkalinity on the pH scale. So to me, that's typically an overfeeding, I think, with cannabis for sure. I mean, I just think that the nutrient brands are typically giving you advice to use more nutrient than necessary because they want you to finish the bottle and buy a new bottle. And they know it's not going to kill your plants, but I do think that overfeeding is a big thing. I think people should feed lightly, and then you can always boost it up. It's very difficult to take it away once you've overfed. So I think that's, to me, the biggest mistake most first timers make. Oh, and someone's asking what the ideal pH is for cannabis. I think in a soil type situation, about 6.2 to 6.5 or so. In hydroponics, it's a little lower, 5.6 to 5.8, around there. But anywhere around, just slightly on the acidic side from neutral, which is 7.
Yeah, I think for me, it's just not measuring the pH. It's like Danny was just saying, that the pH is critical for uptake of certain nutrients, and you're going to get much better uptake by actually having your pH dialed in. So I think a lot of growers underestimate buying a pH pen, even if it doesn't have to be some $150 pen, but just something so you have some kind of idea of what the pH of the solution that you're putting in is going into it. The nutrient thing also, I think, is huge. Most people, again, just kind of think that, hey, if I just keep dumping more and more fertilizer on here, my buds are just going to get bigger and bigger. Where the fact is, like I touched on earlier, you can actually see much smaller buds by doing that. So for the nutrient companies, yes, I agree. I think that they are absolutely, of course, trying to sell you their nutrient line. A lot of times I tell people to start at like 2/3 strength of what the feed chart that company recommends. And honestly, I've seen it where even 2/3 strength is too much, and you go down to half strength, and that's honestly ideal a lot of times. So it's company by company, and it comes back to kind of learning your system and learning what you're using.
From a veg garden perspective, I would say the number one issue I tend to see is in June, it gets hot, the weeds grow prolifically, and the aspirations that people brought to their garden in April and May start to be crowded out by those weeds, and people just kind of give up on weeding because it's physical work and it's hot and it's sweaty that time of year. The weeding's done in June, like if you fail to weed anytime after June, you will still have a great harvest. But if you don't take care of those weedings when the plants are young, then it's very easy to lose your garden. And that's, I would say, one of the most common problems we get is like, people calling us that time of year and sort of in anguish about that. Also, I would add, just based on what I just learned, which I didn't know, that cannabis likes a slightly acidic pH, I would suggest folks who are thinking about integrating cannabis into their garden to not put it with most of their other vegetable crops, because the other vegetable crops typically like a more neutral pH, more towards 7. Potatoes like a more acidic pH, so maybe it's a good match for where you put your potatoes. But I would, in the Northeast, it sounds like I would take the advice I said about lime and maybe not apply that to cannabis, because lime will bring the pH typically back up to neutral. So just throwing that out there, since I just learned that. So.
How about for you, Melissa? What do you think the biggest mistake most first-time composters make?
Oh, you can't really make a mistake. It really is a natural process. You're not looking for more yield. You're not looking for better flavor. You're not looking for any of those sort of things. And it's just, I guess, being patient. And, tomorrow's another day. So if it didn't go great today, you try again tomorrow.
Love that. That's a great cap on this part of our event. So thank you all. That was very insightful, and I enjoyed that. I think in addition to learning about gardening and soils and different kinds of plants, I'm sure everybody in the audience appreciated just getting to know you all a little bit better. So now let's open this up for the audience questions, which we have several. We have more than several, actually. Some of them have been answered. Let's start with the cannabis-specific one. What's your take on feminized cannabis seeds? I forget the name of the chemical used, but do some growers avoid them because of that or any other reason?
Yeah, so colloidal silver is what they use a lot of times to feminize your seeds. Me personally, I think feminized seeds are great for the home grower in terms of commercial cannabis cultivation. I think if you plan on maintaining that cultivar and mothering it out and using it for generation after generation, I much prefer regular seeds. I think the genetics are much more stable in a regular seed than they are a feminized seed. So again, if you're just looking for like a quick harvest, I think feminized seeds are great. You know, you throw them in the ground, it's a guaranteed female. But if you're looking to really kind of do a pheno hunt and really dial in a specific cultivar and find the best cut of that specific cultivar, I think regulars are the way to go. Sure, you have to sex them, you have to weed out the males, but the longevity of that cultivar is going to be much better with a regular seed, in my opinion, than a feminized seed.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. If you're pheno hunting and growing mother plants and you're going to take clones and grow from that, I would definitely recommend regular seeds and doing an actual pheno hunt and choosing the best cultivar out of as large of a population as you can grow out. But for the home grower, feminized seeds are fine, and they, as Pete mentioned, they're going to be guaranteed females if you get them from the right source. As far as the process of making them and the chemicals that are used, those chemicals are sprayed onto a female plant to basically stress it out and force it to grow quote unquote male pollen. It'll make pollen that'll make female or hermaphrodite seeds, and that's how that process works. But the seeds themselves aren't like contaminated by that chemical that's used. So I wouldn't worry so much about the colloidal silver contaminating the seeds in some type of way, but you may have strains that are more prone to hermaphrodism and might be easier to stress out due to that inherent stress that was used to cause them to become feminized seeds to begin with. So for the home grower, they're fine. But for people who are going to grow out mother plants and take clones and do production gardening from them, I would definitely go with regulars. And there's a whole process by which you take a clone from the plant while it's in the vegetative stage and then flower the clone to determine what each plant is going to be, so that you don't have to flower the mother plant and then bring it back into the vegetative stage, which also can cause some stress. That's my recommendation as far as feminized and regular.
Next question from the audience. Say, I'm in the Hudson Valley. Can you recommend the strain with the highest THC on the East Coast? So that's a big ask. What do you guys think?
I mean, my suggestion would be not to worry so much about the highest THC to begin with, because there's so much more about cannabinoids and terpenoids and the interaction that they have with THC. So if you can find a strain with 15% or more THC, then at that point you have plenty of THC. And I think what's more important is the interaction of the other terpenoids, cannabinoids, and flavonoids with the THC. THC on itself, on its own, which I've tried, pure THC, it's kind of boring. And it's those other factors that combine to give you the sense, the flavor, and a variety of different effects in conjunction with THC. So it's like people talk about the entourage. I like what Todd McCormick says. It's more like an orchestra, and THC's there, but there's a bunch of other things interacting with it. So, you know, rather than focusing on THC alone, I would say it's much more important to find great terps and effect, long-lasting, cerebral, whatever it is that you're looking for. It's not just in THC, it's in the interaction with THC and other terpenoids and flavonoids and cannabinoids and all of that.
Yeah, I think that is great that you touched on that. I think that is a huge misconception right now, specifically with cannabis legalizing across the country, as everyone just looks at your THC percentage and thinks that, you know, the more THC is going to be the better experience, is going to be the better cultivar for you to try. And I know that I have, you know, dozens of people that come up to me and say, hey, I tried, you know, this cultivar and it's 16% THC. But it got me feeling so much better than this 30% THC strain that's out there. So I think, again, like, you know, like Danny just touched on, the interactions between your different cannabinoids, including all the minor cannabinoids they're finding these days, as well as your terpenes, is really the more critical thing. I think even for someone that's been consuming for most of their life, if you get them a, you know, cultivar that's in the teens for THC percentage, but it has a strong terpene percentage with great combinations, I think you're going to end up finding that you sometimes much prefer the effects of some of those cultivars that might have the lower THC because of all those interactions. So no, I think that is great that we touched on that during this talk.
Agreed. Thank you both. So the next one is about thinning out plants, not removing whole plants, thinning out leaf structure and composition. So as the cannabis grows, when do you remove fan leaves? Do you thin out the lower branches for ventilation and stronger buds?
So yeah, I'll kick this one off. So I think for defoliation and things like that, I think starting the training in veg is important. That being said, I think once you get into the flowering rooms, removing some of those larger fan leaves that are inhibiting the light to get lower into that canopy is going to feed right into the question about yields earlier, where, you know, getting some of those larger shade leaves out. Sure, like a lot of people think, hey, the more fan leaves I have, it's like a solar panel. It's, you know, adding all this extra energy to the plant. But the fact is, if you have some of these larger leaves in the lower canopy, it's acting more like a sink as opposed to a source. So removing them actually gets your plants more productive. So again, I think initial training in veg is great. I personally think still doing some defoliation early on in flower is okay. And I think you'll see better results by doing that.
Yeah, I agree. I think selective defoliation, taking some of the fan leaves off selectively is good. Sometimes you can just sort of tuck them in under a branch rather than remove them entirely, just to let some of that light reach the lower tops. And, you know, taking off a lot of the lower branches entirely can really help with airflow throughout the canopy, and that can help discourage powdery mildew and mold as well. Just having more air flowing around your plants and below your plants can really help. And then you're not going to yield much off of those lower branches anyway. So I think that's a good way to increase airflow and also even increase yield for your tops that are going to, you know, the energy of the plant will focus more on the upper branches.
Awesome, thank you. You also just answered one of the other questions, which was about mold. I think that having airflow is key. So just to honor everybody's time, this will be the last question. So do you believe terpenoids adapt to the grower's need? I think that's
I don't know if I quite understand. I know that the plant,
kind of a response.
The plant will acclimate to its location over time and over generations, for sure. I mean, that's how we get all the different varieties. Is you take a plant from one place and you bring it to a different altitude or latitude, or into a valley from a mountain or whatever it might be. the plant will acclimate to its new environment, and over generations, the terpenes and everything else, the leaf size, and will adjust, or the plant will die, basically. So the plant will adapt for sure, but I'm not sure if terpenes will adapt specific to a grower's needs. I'm not sure if I understand that the question properly, but I do think that a plant can adapt to its environment and will over time, but I'm not sure if the terps can sense the grower and adjust accordingly.
No, I agree. I don't really know if the grower themselves is going to shift the terpene expression of that cultivar. There's some products out there that claim you're going to get an increased terpene production from their products. I know sulfur is one that people say you get much better terpene expression. But again, that's adding supplemental nutrients as opposed to the plant shifting for what you specifically want.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate that. And I just want to say some things to wrap. I want to give special thanks to everyone at the Pass, because there were a lot of contributors who helped put this together. And huge thank you to the four of you, the speakers here today. Very much appreciated for taking the time to help us with our own growing endeavors. And then thanks to everybody in the audience today for just being here and participating. You should all be on the lookout for the next speaker series, which is in May. So TBD on exact date, probably the third week, locking that in shortly, third week of May. We're going to explore the popularity and the benefits of edibles, cooking with cannabis, as well as the stigma of cannabis use for parents. So sign up for our email list and you'll get some updates on that. And that concludes today's event. Thanks again, and we hope you all had a fantastic time and that your growing season is as smooth and as productive as possible this year and beyond. So take care and enjoy your cannabis.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, see you, everyone.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.